Right, that sounds great. So I want to introduce myself. My name is Jenny Niemann. I'm with the sustainability section in FlexApp, and I generally work on our climate efforts, so climate action. We also have, though, two very important people to this conversation, Sarah and Leah from our housing program. So I don't know, Sarah and Leah, if y'all want to just introduce yourself real quick, because they're going to be, I think, helpful for this presentation and conversation.
I can go.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jenny. Go ahead, Leah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Leah Bloom. I am the Affordable Housing Advancement Project Manager. Thanks so much for having us here. Hand it to Sarah.
Thanks. I think Leah and I found the mute button at the exact same time.
We did.
My name is Sarah Dar, and I am the housing director for the city. So we're here with Jenny to learn along with you as well.
Thank you so much, Leah and Sarah, for being here. Thank you, Rick. And thank you all for your time. It looks like we have a good group here. I'm really excited for this conversation. I won't beat around the bush. We have some hard issues, right? And Rick and I have been emailing, and he's been talking with Nicole. Y'all might know Nicole Antonopoulos. She's our sustainability director. She's kind of my counterpart with all of this. She ended up having a conflict she couldn't get out of today. But I'm here and really excited. I give the same presentation. We're going to have the same talk. And it's hard. And these are some sticky issues. I know that housing in FlexApp, the things y'all think about every day, is really difficult. So I just want to kind of put that out there and acknowledge that. Climate action is also hard, right? And so I think what I want to do is I'm going to talk about the carbon neutrality plan. I'm hoping you've heard about it so far, but if it's the first time you're hearing about it, that's good too. I'll send some links. We want your feedback. We want to hear from you. It's really important to this plan that we hear from you, that we hear all different perspectives, because it's how we have a better plan. But I'm going to present on that. So I'm going to kind of do what we call our roadshow, and I'll present on the plan and talk about what we're talking about. And that's going to be a PowerPoint. I'm going to try to keep that to under 15 minutes because the more important part of today is hearing from y'all and getting your feedback, and so that we can adjust, right? And so that we can kind of move forward with that feedback in mind. Again, it's really, really critical. So I'm going to go a little bit fast through the plan. And the reason is because it's really just a summary, right? And with the plans online, and you know what, I'll just send the link to the plan right now. I'll just send this one link because it's got pretty much everything on there. It's got the, oh, Leah, you're the best. Happy Friday, indeed. It is good that it is Friday. But this has a link to the plan right up top. It has a link to the survey. It also has a link to like a revisions and feedback form that you can fill out anonymously if that's the way you want to do it and not go through the survey. You can just tell us what you think about the plan in kind of an open-ended format. So there's a lot of different ways to engage and to give feedback. So that's the link if you're interested in looking as I go. But yeah, really this presentation is going to be kind of the nuts and bolts of the plan and the kind of things that we are thinking about with it. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get started, unless Rick, you wanted to have anything. Ooh, and I think I am seeing that I cannot share a screen. So I think you might have to make me a co-host.
There we go. Yep. Try it now.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Yep. Good. That was very fast. I am impressed. All right. So again, I'm going to get started. And Rick, thank you. Again, thank you, everybody. I just really appreciate the opportunity to be here. So I'm going to turn off my video just while I'm presenting. Well, that's not true. I'll keep a face here. Rick, I do look forward to the day when we can all do this in person again. But again, I just so appreciate that y'all are here right now. Again, I'm Jenny. I work in our sustainability section. I'm here again. We're going to talk about the plan. We want your feedback. I will also ask for your help in spreading the word. Regardless of how you feel about this, we want to hear from you. We want to hear from the folks you know, right? And so any of these links will ask that you spread on to folks that you think might be interested or should know about this. This plan only gets better with more input, right? It helps us to consider different perspectives. So the first, really, in terms of background, it's just we find that it's really helpful when everybody's on the same page for this discussion about what we're thinking about and why we act. I know some of you may have seen some of this before. So just briefly, you know, we expect hotter temperatures and we expect to get drier. That's generally the basic level of climate change that we're thinking about in Flagstaff. It's not going to be 120 degrees. Flagstaff is in a really privileged position in that we're not going to see really devastating effects from the natural side of things, besides forest fires, and we'll talk about that. But really, we're going to see slightly hotter temperatures. We will see, actually, our low temperatures are going to increase, if that makes any sense, and we'll see increased aridity. There are kind of after effects of that, right? And so we're going to have less snowpack. We're going to have more precipitation as rainfall, and then we'll have more wildfire risk. That is really the biggest kind of most severe risk that we see. And the city's done a lot of thinking about that for a long time, as I'm sure you all know. The thing we think a little bit more about is the people side. So kind of the cascading effects of what that means. So we need to think about our water infrastructure. Cities thought about that for a long time. We need to think about land use and housing and tourism and economy. These two are really tied really closely together. Y'all probably know that better than anybody, right? We think actually less about climate change in Flagstaff here, but then we think about climate change in the Phoenix area, right? In the valley, and what hotter and hotter temperatures in the valley are going to do to visitation up here in the summer, right? As well as second homes, as well as, you know, just what that looks like, right? In terms of as those folks who can leave the valley for even just a weekend, right, to get out of the heat, they're going to start seeing more and more days over 120 degrees, right, over the next couple of decades. And that's hot, right? And so folks are going to want to leave probably even more than they do now, right? And so what does that mean for our local systems, right? What does that mean for our land use, for our housing systems? I'll tell you, this is the climate impact I worry the most about, right? The fire issues and then the forest are important, but honestly, this one's harder, right? Thinking about what those changes to our economy and to our land use and housing systems mean. We also think about public health. So, you know, maybe that's, I have a neighbor who's 90-something years old and she doesn't have air conditioning, and in June she struggles, right? Also, folks, maybe you know some folks with asthma, right? How do we think about different groups in our community? And that leads us to sort of the equity equation, right? We know that folks will struggle with climate change based on different kind of groups, right? Maybe they're older adults. Maybe, you know, it's they're working and they're trying to live in Flagstaff, right? And the cost of living is really high, right? They're also a vulnerable group, right? Maybe it's based on a health condition, your race or ethnicity, or some other part of your background or your identity. Maybe your neighborhood, right? The museum fire was a good example of it. You know, the fire threatened certain neighborhoods, the flooding may threaten certain neighborhoods, right? How do we think about these different groups? How do we think about our climate actions as well? Not only just climate change, but how our climate actions affect those different groups. I want to talk a little bit about the kind of where we are now, just because it's driven by the Flagstaff City Council. You know, Flagstaff's work has evolved really rapidly over the last 4 years. We had our first climate plan in November 2018, and some of y'all might feel like a little bit of whiplash because it's fast. It's fast to go from one plan to another. I'm here to tell you they build on each other, right? We're really talking about mostly the same issues, carbon neutrality, and what I'll talk a little bit more about what that term means. That is, it's faster, it's more aggressive, it's more focused, right? But it generally is trying to do the same things that our first 2018 plan did. What we learned after passing that plan is the community came to us and said, your plan doesn't go far enough. And that's because the scientific community, the international scientific community, came out and said, the whole world needs to move more quickly. We need to do much more and be much more aggressive in order to avoid essentially catastrophe from climate change worldwide. Right. And so they said everyone needs to move more quickly. Community members came and told council that they wanted them to move more quickly. A couple hundred community members came to council in January 2020. That's this picture. It's really cool. They were really well organized. They said, well, we're grandparents concerned, and we're businesses, and we're health professionals, all these different groups. And in response, City Council declared a climate emergency in June 2020. So that climate emergency declaration, again, is based on the need for all communities to act. It really calls for an increase in ambition and mobilization, as well as full community participation. This isn't just, you know, the folks who like thinking about climate all the time. You don't think about climate all the time. It's sad. But it's for everybody, right? We need to talk to literally everybody. And so we need to set a goal for carbon neutrality, is what it also said. And that's why we're here today. So just a little bit more background. We think about 3 types of climate action: reducing our impact, and that's mostly carbon neutrality, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. But we also need to prepare for change, and we need to help the most vulnerable. And I'll talk about how this plan integrates those 2 other ideas today. Ideally, we're doing all 3 of those goals. We're completing all 3 of those goals at once with all of our actions as part of this carbon neutrality plan. When we think about our impact, we think about 3 things. So we think about powering buildings and homes. We think about transportation emissions, so how folks get together, get around, and we think about consumption and landfill. I find y'all's work fascinating because you all, like our homes, right? We do all of these 3 things, and right, they really affect all 3 of these things. That means there's a lot of opportunity as well as challenge, but we really want to focus on those opportunities. So in terms of the carbon neutrality plan, I'm finally going to get into it. I want y'all to know, and if you've been browsing on the website and you open that plan, I think it's 50 something pages. I'm going to really get into the meat of it right here. The biggest thing to know about this plan, though, it's this framework for action. It has overarching strategies to kind of make our broad goals and actions really clear. What we're trying to do with this plan is really provide kind of the vision for where we're going over the next 9 years. There's a lot that isn't said in this plan, right? So we say we want to increase energy efficiency, right? We don't say exactly how we're going to do that. We don't say if it's going to be rebates or incentives or grant funding, right? And the truth is we don't know, right? We know there are a lot of options, and we talk about some of those examples in the plan. But what we're trying to do now is just get everybody on the same page about where we're going and what those broad strategies are. So that's really what I'm going to talk about today. And I say that for 2 reasons, just so you know it's clear that this is this broad thing, but also that we're going to need your help in the implementation stage, right? This plan is that first step to kind of say where we're going, but the implementation stage is actually harder. And for especially folks like y'all who know our housing market really well, right? And the challenges of that market, we're gonna need you to help us with that implementation, to make sure that we're not having unintended consequences, right? To make sure that we're hearing your perspective. So that's just my plug to say, like, this is just the start in a lot of ways. And there's a lot here. City Council also has not passed this plan. This is a draft. We will go to them in May with a final plan. So just really quick, carbon neutrality. It basically means balancing the scales. And there's a lot of words here, but really it just means first we're going to look at our emissions. So the car I drive and then my home, right, and what I eat, that all has emissions. And that's the left side of the scale. And we're going to reduce those emissions as much as possible. We're not going to eliminate them. There will still be many, many buildings in 2030 that have natural gas, right? And many, many cars that are driving on gasoline or diesel. So we're going to measure those emissions. And then to get to neutrality, you have to balance it out. That's how you kind of achieve that net zero. And that's the right side of the scale. You do that with what's called carbon dioxide removal, actually taking out carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. This is hard. This is new. I will tell you, like, there are scientists and philanthropists and business investors from across the world working on this problem of how do we take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. There's a lot of projects starting up. We're going to be looking to kind of figure out how to get that done. We're going to be learning from across the world, right, on how we do that. But that is a really big part of that equation for carbon neutrality. And that's just us being realistic. You can't get to zero, right? By 2030, nobody really knows how to do it. But what we need to do is we need to get as close to zero as we possibly can. So now for the meat of the plan. Again, as I said, it's a framework. It's also a living document. Things are changing every day. Batteries are changing every day. Vehicles are changing every day, right? Homes, technology is changing every day. And we know that there's going to be more and more opportunity over time. So we need a flexible document. We don't want to be rigid and stuck into kind of, well, this is what we have to do because it's what the plan said. We want it to be able to kind of evolve with changing conditions. Bold actions and big shifts. I'm going to talk about that. We have to move quickly, and we have to make big changes in our community to do this. If we set these big goals, we have to align our citywide decisions. We have to get all the different decision-making structures of the city aligned. And this conversation, I do just want to tell you, has been informed. We've talked to about 2,000 folks now. We're going to keep talking to folks. My promise is that we're going to keep talking to folks throughout implementation, even after if we get this plan passed. So our 3 goals: carbon neutrality, adaptation, and equity. I'm actually not going to spend a lot of time on those because we'll get into them in just one second. But the main part of this plan, and you probably can hear a crying baby in the background, in which I'm sorry, just let me know if you can't hear me. But we have 4 main focus areas. So, and again, this isn't that different from the 2018 climate plan, but it's about strengthening our neighborhoods. It's about cleaning our energy sources, our consumption, and our commitment. These are filled in by 9 different areas. And so if you really want to know what is in the plan, it's basically this. This is how we focus about this. I'm going to go through these 9 different areas very quickly because again, I want to get to this conversation. But this first area, strengthening our neighborhoods, we think about equity, we think about resilience, and we think about dependence on cars. For resilience is really adaptation, right? It's about adapting to change. We're all adaptable, right? We all adapt to changes in our lives. We want to be adaptable as a community. So how do we change? How do we adapt to maybe a drier forest, right? We also want to think about kind of short-term events. So maybe it's a forest fire or maybe it's flooding, but also long-term changes, right? So that might be our housing market. How do we adapt to right now a really crazy housing market, right? But long-term shifts in our land use maybe, right? Or long-term shifts in how our forest is used. How do we make sure that we kind of build that resiliency into our community? Sometimes this is as simple as meeting your neighbors, right? And knowing who needs a snow plow, right? Like, we might call it the good old days. I prefer to think of it as the good new days. There's a lot that we can do just in our neighborhoods in terms of self-reliance. How do we do more of that as a community? The other part of this, we already talked about kind of different groups and vulnerable groups, but it's just making sure that when we act for climate action, that we're really thinking about disadvantaged groups and making sure we're not doing harm. We've certainly done harm in the past, right, as a society when we thought we were doing good. So how do we think about that and make sure that with each step, we're thinking about how are different groups affected by this action, right? And who are we helping and making sure we're not, hurting anybody. Finally, decrease dependence on cars. Right now, we're dependent on cars as a community. I'm dependent on cars as a person, I promise. We are dependent on cars as a country, right? What we have found, though, is that communities that are a little bit less dependent on cars are healthier, right? They are actually economically thriving, right? They're doing more with less if they depend less on cars to get everywhere, right? If you look at the downtown neighborhood, if you live downtown or maybe you live in town site, right? I'm sure y'all hear about people trying to live in town site, but you can walk to a post office and city hall and a restaurant and maybe your job, right? And the grocery store, right? If you wanted to go to Natural Grocers, maybe you're up the hill and you can go to Bashas', right? You can walk so many places because it's a complete neighborhood. How do we help more parts of our community to look like that, right? Because people love it. Right? When you go down folks want to go downtown, right? Folks don't want to spend a ton of time on Milton because of how we've built it, right? But they might want to spend a lot of time in a neighborhood that is a little bit more complete, right? So how do we think about that? This involves our land use and our transportation. So it's 2 sides of that coin that really influence each other. So it's thinking about our existing neighborhoods. How do we help them have a little bit maybe more density, right? How do we get more ADUs in backyards or casitas or whatever you want to call them, right? How do we think about that? How do we think about maybe, where is space that we could start to have some duplexes, right? Or maybe some corner stores. How can we think about, changes to both new and existing neighborhoods to help folks kind of live in this more complete, what we call a 15-minute neighborhood, where you can walk to meet a lot of your needs within 15 minutes. On the other side of this is the transportation network. So we have work to do to help folks get from A to B, whether that's on a bus or walking or on a bike, right? And comfortably, right? So that it's a nice ride. It's not kind of the last resort. We need to do that encouragement to help folks make those choices. We need to transform our policies within the city so that we're not always thinking about moving cars, but that we actually think about moving people. And then we need to support the bus. The next 2 sections are pretty closer to kind of standard climate action. This is about our energy sources and where our energy comes from and how we use energy, basically. So electric mobility, we talk about electric vehicles a lot, but what we actually, again, we want to have folks not have to depend on their cars, right? So can you take an electric bus, to where you need to go? Can you take an e-bike? There are kids in my neighborhood with like scooters and one wheels and like hoverboards, and I don't know the difference, but I know that they get people where they need to go really cheaply, right? And and quickly, and like unlike me, they don't have to drive a 1-ton vehicle around to get somewhere, right? And so how can we think about encouraging those modes of travel? Because they're already here. You can go pick one up at Walmart, right, for I think like $50. How do we think about welcoming that, as well as e-bikes, right? Seniors love e-bikes. Tons of people love e-bikes for their commute. Those can transform our community. How do we help that? And then finally, electric vehicles. We kind of just need to get out of the way from the city perspective in a lot of ways. The electric vehicle market is transitioning really rapidly. And so we just want to make sure that folks can take advantage of that. Clean electricity, this is also where we've seen a lot of advancement. Solar is now the cheapest, the least expensive energy source in history. It's really cool. You can create it on your house, right? You can actually be creating energy on your house or at your workplace. What we want to do is we want to think about how do we increase solar or other renewables on new buildings, existing buildings, and city-owned buildings. There's a lot of different strategies to do that. We kind of toss some around in the plan, but again, we're not really tied to like, this is exactly how we're going to do that. That will be part of plan implementation, but we know that we need to do this. We need more clean electricity production in our community. Building fuel switching, this one gets a little bit sticky because folks are like, whoa, natural gas, it was clean, right? Natural gas was always framed as sort of a bridge fuel between fossil fuels and essentially renewable energy. It's time to walk over that bridge, essentially. Natural gas and propane are fossil fuels. They come with a lot of emissions. And so what we want to think about is how do we make that switch? It's going to be hard, honestly. I have a gas furnace in my home, right? How do I switch that? The cool thing is if my furnace, if the way I heat my home, maybe I go to a heat pump. It means right now I'm running on fossil fuels, right? If I switch over to, let's say, an electric furnace or an electric heat pump, it means that the way I heat my home can actually get greener and greener over time, lower and lower emissions over time. And that's because the grid can change, right? APS has committed to a 100% clean electricity grid by 2050. And so by 2050, my home will be running on 100% renewable or clean energy, right? Or clean electricity. And so if I'm heating my home with electricity by then, it means that my home can be 100% on clean electricity, which is really, really cool. So that's why we try to switch over to the electric grid as much as we can. If you build a new house now and it's got a natural gas furnace in it, you're pretty much locked into burning emissions, burning fossil fuels for the life of that furnace, right? So how do we think about this for new buildings? There are a lot of rumors out there that we're canceling natural gas. First of all, we're not trying to cancel anybody. But second of all, we actually can't. The state legislator has said you cannot ban natural gas in new developments. And so that's not, I just try to address this because it's not what we're doing. What we want to do is we want to think about incentives. We want to think about how folks can do an all-electric new home, right? How can we think about heat pumps? How can we think about, cost-effective ways that might help us to do that? We also want to think about existing buildings and homes. This is a little bit harder, but it can be helped when we get to that end of life, right? If your furnace is at the end of life, can we help with that transition? Can we incentivize it? And then city-owned buildings, we want to walk the talk. I'd be remiss to not say there are a lot of jobs here. There's a lot of training and education we need to do here at the same time. That's also the same on the renewable energy front. I know I'm now over time. So consumption, I'm going to talk really quickly. This is just building energy use in our homes and in our buildings. And energy efficiency is the cheapest way to reduce our carbon emissions in our buildings. And so how do we do that? Sustainable consumption and waste management. This is recycling, right? But recycling is kind of the last thing. We want to think about reuse. We want to think about how can our consumption be more local, more beneficial, et cetera. And then the commitment. This is that other side of the scale. This is carbon dioxide removal. So balancing that scale by removing carbon dioxide, essentially. We're going to try and do this as locally as possible, right? Can we do regenerative agriculture? Can we do forest restoration, et cetera, to actually bring benefits to the Flagstaff and Northern Arizona communities from removing carbon dioxide? Again, there's going to be a lot of investment in this and across the world. So how do we take advantage of that? In terms of outcomes, there's a lot here, and this is all in the plan, but this is all to say we need to move quickly and we need to make really big shifts to meet this goal that City Council has given us. And so what we've tried to do here is just put numbers out. We need 2,000 home solar systems, right? That's a lot. How do we get there, right? We need to do, thousands of residential retrofits to help them reduce their energy use and electrify homes. There are a lot of homes in Flagstaff, y'all probably know this, that don't even have attic insulation, right? Or have very poor attic insulation. Some of the times that's a really easy fix that pays for itself, right? Sometimes it's harder. Electrification might be harder. So how do we do that? Luckily, climate action makes life better. And I want to touch on this real quick because we're really lucky in that climate action can make life better in a lot of different ways. There's a lot of different co-benefits, and that's not just, the feel-good benefits of like, oh, your neighbors. There's cost-saving benefits, right? There are tons of resilience benefits. And so how do we focus on that? That also needs investment. And so we have in our survey right now, you can tell us how you want to invest in these actions, if you want us to invest in them at all. But, right, is it fees? Is it sales tax, bonds, grants? There's a lot of different ways to pay for things. And so how do we think about those different options? And we really want to hear from you. Finally, and I promise I'm almost done, many hands. This isn't just going to be through the city alone. It cannot be. We will never get anywhere, frankly, if it's just through the city. And luckily, the market is going in this direction. Utility companies are generally going in this direction. Community members, businesses, other governmental action. It's going to be really key to do collaboration, to have a lot of creativity and problem solving. Now I'm getting into, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but I just want to throw these things out here because I'm hoping it starts a conversation. And again, I really want to hear from you. Climate change is going to hurt our vulnerable communities, right? That includes folks who are struggling to live here, right? Because maybe it's cost of housing, right? Which Rick and I have talked a lot about, right? Like, how do we think about this as we're acting, right? We want climate action to minimize harm as much as possible. That's the whole reason why we're acting, right? We also want to help. And so we think about targeted universalism, so helping kind of the most vulnerable community, and that actually helps everybody, but also being aware of unintended consequences. And then finally, we know that climate action can help and it can impact housing, right? So when we think about building energy, maybe there's more costs up front, but it's cheaper over time, right? And maybe, how does this help reduce cost of living is really what we're looking at, right? We don't want to be increasing cost of living. How are we reducing cost of living when we're looking at all of this? Everything about transportation costs and reducing transportation costs. When you're driving an electric vehicle, it costs a lot to get into that electric vehicle right now, right? How do we get more people into them, right? And how do we help finance? Because once you're driving it, gas costs about $1 a gallon. That's a really significant savings, especially if you're driving a lot, right? How do we help more people access what are essentially our cost savings from fuel and maintenance? You just have to kind of get over that hump to get in that car. Land use. So I know y'all are really familiar with this and then the climate emergency, but some of the solutions that have been thrown around for the climate emergency, for the housing emergency, are the same as for the climate emergency, right? How do we think about infill and increased density and zoning changes for flexibility, right? Mixed use. How do we think about all of that? Because it can help us for both of those solutions. And then finally, health and housing. I promise I'm done now, but I just want to say at this website, you can review the plan. You can take our survey. I will send a link directly to the survey as well. We have an open house website. Don't look at that because we had one open house last night, but we do have one next week. And so, Saturday, tomorrow. So I'll send links to all of that. But this is our open house website. That is Jeff Hall with Lowell. He's talking about Climate Change 101 in this very Jeff Hall kind of science way, but also very sweet. There's high schoolers on there. There's an energy expert on there talking about things. All of it. I encourage you to look it out, and I will send. I'll just bombard you all, and also ask folks to maybe send them out for me afterwards. But I'll put my information in the chat. And now I'm going to stop talking because I really want to hear from you, and I really look forward to the discussion. So thank you. Sorry that was a little fast, but I really appreciate your time and just letting me kind of start the conversation there.
Okay, I see there's several questions that are raised, and somebody has their hand raised.
You guys are allowed to unmute yourselves. You do have the ability to do so.
So I see it. Are y'all all right with me kind of just starting with these questions in the Q&A function? Is that all right, Rick? Okay. So I'll go with the first one. So Chris, the question was, in case y'all can't see it, who's responsible for the approval of density of housing in the center of the city? City's already highly populated. Increasing the height of building structures, housing is only making things worse. This is in direct relation to your topic today. That is in direct relation to my topic today. You're right. I think I would probably disagree that increasing the height of things makes things worse. From an energy perspective, we know that multifamily housing is a lot more energy efficient. It's also water efficient. It's also transportation efficient. So there's a ton of efficiencies that we get from that. I think that this community has struggled in the past because of what that high density housing ends up looking like, right? And maybe some high profile examples. I think when you look around our community, we have actually tons of apartment buildings, right? And they've generally fit in okay, right? I think there's questions about the massing. I think about how they fit in neighborhoods. And I think those are all really appropriate questions. I think we just need to be able to have conversations with our community that says, you know, we need to put people in homes, right? We need more homes for people. Flagstaff is growing. It's not going to stop growing, right? How do we accept density, right? And how can we get some density that maybe is appropriate? And Chris, feel free to chime in. You know, just unmute yourself, and I'm happy to talk about it. And Leah or Sarah, please feel free to jump in too. But we hear about this all the time, right? Because people don't want kind of what might feel like really intense community change to them. But there's so many good things that can come from multifamily housing, a little bit denser housing. And maybe it doesn't look like huge apartment buildings, but maybe it might look like duplexes, right? And how can we think about this like kind of wide variety of housing types that we could possibly have? It doesn't have to be, you know, a hub or a single family house. There's a lot in the middle there. Okay, all right. I'll keep moving on unless anybody else wants to jump in. But again, I certainly don't need to be the only talker here. Yeah, so Flagstaff can be a public transportation model for the rest of the nation and the world. Chris, we are on the same page. Agreed, right? So it's not Bozeman. Missoula has done a really interesting thing where they have decided to just make their bus free, right? I think they've double ridership, right? Because I will tell you, I don't know how much the bus costs, and I love the bus, right? But when I need to maybe go on to take the bus, I don't have the quarters. I think it might be $1.75. Somebody correct me. Y'all probably know better, right? But that's a barrier for folks, right? And you get on there and people on the bus are watching you, right? Or if I'm putting my bike on the bus, it's scary, right? Missoula was like, we're done with that. We're just going to have a free bus, right? Because we already subsidized part of it. We also have free roads. So folks are like, I don't know, but we have free roads. We have lots of other free things in our community. And so it's just kind of putting the bus onto that category of things that we provide up front, no matter how much you use it, right? Like roads. So they've done that. They have increased their ridership for visitors, for students, for everybody, and they're decreasing traffic at the same time. So I agree. I think we can do some really awesome things with public transportation. The community voted down our last transit tax, right? They said the continuation of the tax, I believe, in 2018. So we have some work to do to help folks kind of understand how maybe expanded transit can be good for them. Even if you're not going to take the bus, it's still good, right? It lowers the cost of living, right? Because if you can take the bus, you're not having to drive your car. You know, for the folks who go to the bus, it also means that fewer people are driving on the road. And then why do we need APS? We can get our own solar and batteries without them. Yes and no. APS has a lot of money and they have very strong now carbon goals, and we want to work with them as a partner. So we are, you know, they are our electric grid, right? We are a regulated utility state. There's conversation about us not being one day, but for now, APS is who's given us power, right? APS also owns the transmission lines. And so we are working on solar out at Red Gap Ranch, about 40 miles east of town. And that is going to be probably in partnership with APS. And the great reason is because they want solar, right? They want a lot more solar. Again, solar is the cheapest energy source we have ever had, right? And so if we build solar and we build it with APS, it actually can be beneficial. APS, I probably shouldn't say APS is money. APS is trying to make investments, right, in this, as are we, right? But the more we can partner with a company like APS, the better off we'll be, right? And then we can spread those benefits around. We can also spread the cost of that investment around, which is really important, right, for the city of Flagstaff, right, for our taxpayers, et cetera, to be able to do that. Chris says not that many years ago APS poo-pooed solar. They did, and the market has changed, and APS has changed. And I'll tell you, it's because the market has changed, right? And every utility company in the U.S. is going in this direction. It's where we're all going. Again, it's been really helped by technology here. So thanks, Chris, for the questions. They're important, and we've got to talk about it. So you know, the city is trying to do as much solar as we can, I should say. We just put solar panels up at NASET. That was through a grant with APS. I think that was mostly funded by APS. And so they're helping us to accomplish our goals. We also can put our solar panels up on our own. We have a number of solar installations that we're not involved with APS, but they are going on to the APS grid. So APS does need to be a partner no matter what. And frankly, they've been a good partner to us in helping us move forward with our goals. I'm going to put in some links here real fast. Who else has questions? All right, so I just put in the link to the plan document, and that takes you to the plan. Again, you got most of the summary here, but this is the survey, most importantly. We really want your input in the survey. We absolutely need it, and it's going to be really important for us to kind of understand all the different perspectives here. Finally, here's the open house site. So that was the picture of Jeff. You do have to create an account. All you need to create an account is, I think, just a username and, or sorry, an email address. We won't spam you through that. It just gets you kind of into this course. And this course has all these different videos of folks talking about electrification and, you know, electrification of homes, electrification of transportation. They talk about equity. They talk about food systems. High schoolers, I think, made at least 2 videos. So they're excited about it and good at videos. But it's just really cool to hear from essentially your neighbors in talking about this. And then I will give one more link because we've heard some folks don't want to fill out the survey, and that's quite all right. We want to have as many opportunities for feedback as possible. And so on our climate website, we actually have a form where you can just give us revisions to the plan. The survey is pretty rigid, right? And then it says, tell us if you agree or disagree. And we do have some open-ended places, but this is kind of an open-ended place where you can say, you can tell us anything you want. But you can also, you know, it's mainly for revisions to the plan of like on page, 62, there's even page 62. On page 22, y'all talk about this. I would really rather, see this. But anyways, that's the last link in there. And I'm sorry, I'm bombarding you. Tad, are there any data resources that we can provide clients as far as utility cost savings that offset initial costs? Yes, there are. There's some really great reports. And I'll just say here, Flagstaff is not the city leader in this, right? There are a lot of, Flagstaff leads in a lot of ways, but there's so many different cities that are working on this and have been working on this for a really long time, which is really nice. I think that as like a decade ago, I heard a report from New York City had basically inventoried all of their buildings and that this is how we're going to electrify everyone, right? And so there's a lot of folks working on that. And Tad, I think perhaps as a follow-up, and I'll be able to send this to Rick, you're right. That's what we need. And I think we need to do a better job of giving you all those resources. So I don't have the links to them in my back pocket, but there are some really good studies that I can send you. And perhaps, links to studies aren't always, as I'm saying that, aren't always the best thing to do, right? It perhaps we need to do kind of like a summary sheet. Would that be appropriate and helpful?
Yes, it would be. It would be helpful. Yeah, if you just email me all those links, I'll make sure that our association office has them and can share them with all of our members.
Okay.
One question that I have, because everybody's talking about trying to replicate the downtown experience in other areas of our community, and in fact, new areas that are yet to come. But let me just make a point on that because I think it's something that isn't really being discussed. Downtown is successful for the most part because of the proximity to the university and because of tourists. If you remove those 2 elements, downtown would not survive because there aren't enough people living down there to walk to support all those businesses. It just simply wouldn't work, okay? The Presidio was started originally with that concept in mind. Our association mentioned this to city staff that it would not work the way they had it planned back in the 90s. And needless to say, it failed. It went bankrupt. And the Presidio that we see today is not anywhere even remotely close to what was originally planned in the late 90s. And the Presidio is probably the most dense residential development as a whole that we have in the city of Flagstaff. And the housing prices in there are going bananas. They are just escalating considerably. So at least for now, density is not necessarily a solution to affordability, at least not yet. But one of the questions that I have in regards to that has to do with the condos that are north of the Starbucks on Route 66, just below the Catholic Church. Mm-hmm. Those are three-story tall condos. Why aren't they 5, 6, 7, 8 stories? There's no view shed to block. It's not blocking anybody's view shed. They would be a lot more affordable if there were more units there than the 3-story tall buildings. Why didn't we plan for that?
You know, Rick, we're aligned, right? I have asked the same question, right? I'm not sure 8 stories, but even 4 stories, right? We could have a third more housing, right? If even they were 4 stories. And we have actually, my husband, who is not involved in any of this, is always like, why not put all the housing there, right? It's just against the mesa, right? I think it's a good question. And I think so, you know, it was zoned, I think, for hire, right? And I think it might have been the developer's choice. I'm not exactly sure. Leah or Sarah, please weigh in. But, you know, I think it comes back to our culture, right? And I'll tell you, a lot of the climate folks are not happy, right, about the tall buildings, right? So in some ways, this is on us, right? I think it's actually on all of us to talk about our choices in really honest ways, right there. Because I think that, I'll tell you, I'm pretty sure, you know, it's possible the developer just didn't want to fight about it, right? And said, like, you know what, this is good, they're going to pay for themselves, and this is what our pro forma is going to say, and 3 stories is great. There's also, you know, developments, there's also, not everybody wants to live in, you know, what changes between a 3-story and 5-story building, I'm not sure a lot, right? But there's of course a lot of, you know, decisions that developer made. But I'll say, I think for our part, that we need to change the way we talk about this issue in Flagstaff, right? And we need to talk about kind of what's at stake, right? I think what you all probably deal with all the time is that our firefighters and our teachers can't afford to buy a house in Flagstaff, right? Frankly, I don't know anyone that can afford to buy a house in Flagstaff right now, right? But I think that, like, that's what's at stake, right? And that's what we're talking about when we talk about density in big buildings, right? And again, it doesn't always have to look like a huge building that's out of place. It can look like smaller buildings that are better, right? And you know, to be fair, that development is density, right? And it's great. And it's actually not that far from downtown, right? Like, there's some good things about it for sure. And it's going to bring us a lot of housing. I believe that there are designated affordable units as part of it. I'm not sure. But, you know, I think it's a good question. And I'll just take it back to that culture, right? I think we have to have a culture where we're talking about really honestly the costs and the benefits. I think often we talk about views, we talk about, you know, changing the character of the neighborhood. We don't talk about the benefits of what different types of housing can bring, right? Whether that's from the climate perspective, because, you know, multifamily housing has all these benefits, or from the housing perspective. I think your point about Presidio is a good one. I think that that's correct. I think that if we didn't have the university and tourism, though, I think we would look like Winslow, right? Which I know I actually really like Winslow, right? But we would be a different town. But I would hold up maybe the sawmill development as a way that has worked, right? That makes worse. And I know it took them a while, right, to fill out that retail, but I'm pretty sure they're there, right? And how do we think more about that? They also benefit from proximity to downtown and from students, right? And so how do we think about that? I'd probably hold up 4th Street. You know, we've got some successful businesses on 4th Street. We've got, you know, a successful brewery over there, right? Folks can walk to that, right? Sunnyside is a really complete neighborhood, right? And even, you know, behind that, Shadow Mountain, right? You can take a walk down to the grocery store, right? You can walk down to, you know, if you're living up in, really anywhere kind of north of there, you can walk to a lot of places, actually. You can walk to Buffalo Park, you know? So I think that our community actually does it in different ways. Or over on Country Club, right? There's all that mixed use there, right? And those are successful businesses, right? You can go over to, I want to say Marcos is over there, right? Or Toast It Out, right? And so that it doesn't necessarily look the way we're building it, where it's all integrated, right? And I know we have issues with, mixed use and vacant mixed use, but I do think there are neighborhoods in Flagstaff that are making it work, and it's smaller. And you're right, it's not going to look like downtown. We're not going to replicate downtown ever, right? But can we replicate what some of this other, maybe more gentle mixed use looks like, or gentle density? I'm not sure. Sarah or Leah, feel free to tell me where I got any of those things wrong.
I don't think you got any of those things wrong. I cannot answer the question about why only 3 stories. That's a question for the developer and or potentially our planning staff. I can tell you there are affordable units in there. The developer has been generous in working with housing staff. Other than that, I don't think you've gotten any of the other fact pieces wrong. So Leah and I are both transitioning to our cars to go pick up kids. So I'll stay, but I'm not going to be able to see chat or faces. Okay. So anyway, it's been great to listen to you, Jenny, and thanks for the invite.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah, for being here. And I'll shout real loud if we need to, but I think we can handle it. There is a comment from Chris about, being wrong about how high density is more environmentally friendly. I think from the facts, from the energy and transportation side of it, from the water side of it, we have those numbers. I think you might be talking about other things, and a definition of environmentally friendly is, of course, open interpretation. So I'll give you that for sure. We tend to look at, the transportation sides, the energy sides, and the water sides, just because those are where our metrics are essentially when we think about carbon emissions. Rick, I want to bring up all electric buildings, because it's what it keeps coming up, right? And you brought it up before, if that's okay. Unless, were you about to say something?
No, go ahead. Okay,
so all electric buildings are a hot topic these days, and when we keep hearing about it, and so I just want to bring it up because I think that it's a really interesting issue. So we have seen, again, I talked a little bit about this, but with all electric buildings, right, we want to help folks get on electricity, because that electricity, based on APS's commitment, will be 100% clean by 2050. It's not exactly in line with our goals, but that gets us really far, right? We know that all electric buildings are actually being built by the market already. Some are in Flagstaff. We're seeing a lot in a lot of other places. And Rick mentioned before, some are because of rezoning, and that's true too. And I'm not necessarily involved in that, but we want to see all electric because we think that it's actually going to be cheaper over the long term. And so because there's a lot of kind of fear about that. And so I want to talk first about heat pumps. Heat pumps have kind of changed the game. It used to be that you could not use a heat pump in our climate, right? And there have been all these heat pumps up in Vermont that they've been testing basically for years and years, and they have basically figured it out so that you can use a heat pump as your main or only heating source in a cold climate, which is really cool. The cool thing about heat pumps is that they are 2 or 3 or 4 times more efficient than a natural gas furnace. And so electricity is more expensive to heat with than natural gas, right? But when you're using more efficient equipment, it can bring that cost down and make it basically cost comparable now. So there have been a lot of different studies, and this will be in the package of links that I'm sending about that and how we do that, because it's a hard conversation, right? Because what we don't want to do is we don't want to have folks move into all electric housing and then be saddled with really high electricity bills, right? And they're really struggling in the winter. I'll say that we already deal with that, right? APS gives tons of electricity, and Unisource, I think too, they are giving vouchers to help people heat their homes already, right? So this is already an issue with most of us relying on gas, right? And so the question is, how do we make sure that when we build this kind of all electric future, how do we make sure that we're avoiding that issue? Because the issue is already there. Energy poverty is really real. It's actually really bad in Flagstaff. We have pretty good stats about how many people struggle to pay their utility bills. And when you're paying a ton of your utility bills, you're spending less on other things, right? You're spending less on your health or your food or whatever that is, right? And so we know housing is already expensive, but it's also the question of utility bills as well, and also transportation bills as well. And we can get into that. That's a conversation conversation about, you know, Rick, we've talked about this before about sprawl, right, in our outlying areas, right? And if you're paying a whole lot of money for gas, right? So if you've been able to get a home in an outlying area that's cheaper, right, which is awesome, right? It's hard to buy a house now, but are you paying a ton for gas, right? And what does that look like? And how can we help folks that way, right? It's kind of this whole combination, right? It's those three main things, right? It's utility bills, it's the price of the home, and maybe that's your rent or it's your mortgage, and then it's your transportation costs. And what we want to do is help folks to kind of think about that full package. And then sorry, I've gone a little bit from the all electric conversation, but I just want to throw that out there, is that we are thinking about this. We're trying really hard to make sure that we have the best technology, right? And we're doing all the education to figure out what is the all electric solution. Because again, it used to not be there, but with the technology changes, it's getting a lot better, and it's pretty much cost comparative now when we think about kind of your initial investment and then it paying off over time. But we've got to be careful, right? We don't want to have unintended consequences of, you know, we put all these folks into all electric housing and then they end up with high bills. Again, we're trying really, really hard to be careful and to think of all of that. So I guess I'm just trying to say, like, I promise, I know that it's a concern, and I promise it's a really big issue that we're looking into. But again, we're seeing these studies that are coming out that say, no, like, even with, you know, electricity costing more, this equipment is just so much more efficient that it's doing a better job.
Okay. Any other questions for Jenny at this time? Okay, let me just point out, and I think you brought some of these things up.
Yeah.
You know, there's probably three things that I can think of off the top of my head that you need to really kind of work through. One of which, obviously, we've talked about the cultural change. You know, and this goes back a long way. You know, when we first did the general plan for the city of Flagstaff, it was based on compact development. It was based on walkability. It was based on all those good things that we talk about even today. But as soon as the hub got built, everybody started screaming. You know, the same people that wanted those things were upset, even though now we had these buildings for college students so they could actually walk to the university. So it addressed that issue, but people were not happy. So trying to come across with this cultural change where people start recognizing the density and height, you know, where it makes sense. I mean, nobody wants to block anybody's view sheds. Nobody wants to make ugly buildings. You know, I think we all want the same things in a sense, but I think the culture needs to figure out how we're going to change that mindset, because it's a tough one. It's a difficult one.
It's really difficult.
Yeah. The second thing is the cost. You know, how do we pay for all this? I mean, we are already one of the highest taxed cities in the state of Arizona. So taxes are high. When you add high housing prices, and now you add more cost in terms of taxes, as you already seen, the public turned down the public transportation bond, you know, again, for that reason. So again, trying to figure out, how do we pay for all this? How do we get any of those kinds of things to pass the challenge of getting more taxes passed to the city of Flagstaff is not going to be easy. And then the third thing, and this is, you know, maybe just me because I think of stuff like this, but, you know, most people probably don't, but I'll throw it out there anyway. As we're adding costs and regulations to the price of housing, thinking in terms of long-term gain and how over a longer period of time the cost benefit works out. The average time that a person owns a home is 5 to 7 years. So if they can't recover their cost in 5 to 7 years, then the question becomes, is it really worth it to them? So I think that's something that as you are working through these, that's kind of an equation that you kind of have to look at and say, is this something that's going to take 20 years to pay itself back? Or can they recover their cost within the time frame that they're most likely going to be in the home? Because if they're in the home 10 years, then maybe they get a benefit of 4 or 5 years of the savings. But if they're only going to be in their home 7 years, and now they're at the point to where they can save money, but it's too late because now they're leaving. You know, I think that's something that you just kind of have to keep in the back of your head, even though I'm probably the only one who even thinks of stuff like that. But anyway.
It's a really good point. I really appreciate it, because that's not a number. I know we've talked about it in the past, but it's not a number that's always front of mind for me. So it's really helpful. I guess I would ask Rick, so with that 5 to 7 years, is that Flagstaff? Is that national? Or is
that's a national statistic? No, and I know in Flagstaff, we probably have people that have lived here for a long time. I mean, you know, you have people in my neighborhood, for example, you never hardly ever see any sales up here because nobody ever sells their house up here. But you know, we do have a fairly transit community in the sense, I mean, people's jobs change, their life changes, people move because they want to be closer to kids or grandkids or closer to their parents, you know, so there are all those life-changing things that happen regardless, you know. But I don't know that 5 to 7 years would be a real accurate statistic for Flagstaff, but you know, it's more of a national number, but I think it's something to keep in mind anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And so do you think that kind of in the transaction, because my hope would be, okay, you've invested in this home, right? You've invested in, you know, the heat pumps, whatever that looks like, right? And then you're right, maybe you're at that 7-year payoff and then you're getting to leave. Do you think that gets included in the real estate transaction to help folks out on the kind of selling end, or do you think that just gets lost in the mix?
I think it just gets lost in the mix.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think it's something that anybody really talks about in a transaction. I mean, I'm sure that, you know, even like right now, whatever our property taxes are, they are what they are. Sales taxes is what it is, you know, so we don't really, especially not, I know I don't engage in that conversation with a buyer or a seller when we're working on a transaction. But certainly when new taxes, new fees, new costs come up, you know, that's just going to come up, you know. Do I really want to invest in this because I may pay a lot of money for something, whether it's the cost of the house that they're buying or the new fees, taxes, property taxes, whatever it is that's associated with it. Do they really want to participate in that? If there's a possibility that they might be leaving in 5 to 7 years, you know, so, but I don't think that that's really a conversation that most agents would have with their customers.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Well, if there aren't any more questions, Jenny, if you would just, all these links, if you would just send those links to me,
yep.
I'll make sure that our association has them so they can share them with our members.
Perfect.
And anybody who's still involved here, I would hope that you will submit your thoughts on the open town hall forum that Jenny has sent out, because I think it is important that city staff has as much information from as broad a group of people in our community as possible. You know, and one of the people, and I'll be real kind of blunt about this, the people that show up at City Hall to support stuff like this are typically the more educated, the more affluent, the more scientific, okay, people who come to support this. The people that aren't there are probably renters, tenants, lower income people, you know, people that just don't get involved in politics for whatever reason it happens to be. So, you know, how we discuss this with the entire community is difficult, because the people that really need to hear this stuff, the people that really need to be involved in these decisions, are typically the people that never show up. They just aren't there, you know? And so the cost gets thrown at them, but they had no voice in the process because they're absent. you know, and it's not your fault. It's not my fault. That's just the way it's always been. And it's tough. That's a difficult thing to deal with.
It is. And I fully agree. It's really, you know, and because not everybody has time to think about this stuff, right? They're trying to survive. And so it's something we are thinking about and trying to do as best as we can to get more voices in the room, right? But it's not going to be through a survey, and it's not going to be, you know, showing up at city council. So Tad, sorry, I saw your hand late. Yeah.
No problem. I wanted to speak briefly about what you and Rick had talked about as far as resale value. So nationally speaking, we are seeing there's data that says folks are more and more looking for homes with sustainable features and are willing to pay a premium for that. So that was one of the reasons that over a couple of years ago, we greened the MLS to add all of those features into our MLS system. So buyers and agents can search specifically for some of those features. And then ultimately the goal with that is if the appraisers can use that data to show that somebody paid more for a home specifically because of those features, then it helps with the financing of all of those and all that kind of good stuff. And especially with millennials and Gen Z are just one of the largest, I think actually the largest generation in US history. And as they become more and more active in the buyer market, these issues tend to be more and more important to that demographic. So we are going to start seeing, I feel like we already have here, but it should be everything, all the data that I'm seeing from the national level and NAR is showing that that's going to just continue an upward trend with home buyers.
Thanks, Tad. That's really helpful.
Okay, anybody else have anything to add? Jenny, I can't tell you how appreciative I am of you doing this and taking the time out of your very busy schedule to meet with those members of our association that registered and logged on. And I will make sure that all the links are available to our members on our association website. So they can participate and provide you with whatever comments or feedback they may have. Needless to say, you know, when it comes to housing, we're the group that deals with this every single day. And although, you know, I love talking about what's coming in the future, you know, most of the people that I'm dealing with, it's their issue today. And today's housing market is just probably the most difficult and challenging I have seen in 29 years. You know, it's hard to work with a buyer knowing up front that you're probably not going to be able to help them because there just isn't anything in their price range, or the only place you're going to be able to sell them something is going to be in Williams or Winslow or the Verde Valley because our housing prices are so difficult. I think our housing emergency is as great, if not greater, than our climate emergency. That doesn't mean to say that there isn't a cross benefit there, because I think there is. But I think the housing emergency is just more immediate. It's right now, and our members are dealing with it every single day, and it's tough, I have to say.
I don't envy y'all right now, just thinking about the inventory on the market right now. And I'm hoping we can work together. I think you're right. The housing emergency is certainly more kind of in your face, right? And it's harder to see. I would say climate change already is leading to the housing emergency, right? I think they're both there, but you're right? The housing emergency is like, if you're trying to buy a house here, it's in dollars and cents right here together. So I think that, they're completely related, and I'm hoping, you know, solutions can look similar to both. But Rick, I want to say thank you for opening the door, and I hope that we can come back, right, as we implement this, as we get into the details. We are going to need y'all to be involved, just because of how impactful it can be, right? And we're going to be talking about housing. So I always appreciate the open door, and it means a lot. So thank you.
Of course. And, you know, as with the housing plan that's coming forward, that I know a lot of people are working very hard on, the 10-year housing plan, And there's going to be some elements of that have to be sold to the community. Certainly the climate action plan is going to have to be sold to the community. And I've always tried to make this impression upon city staff is we can be your greatest resource because we talk collectively to thousands of people every single day. I mean, there's 500 plus members in our association, and we're actively out there talking to people every single day. So the more we know about these plans, the more we know about how they can benefit our community, our members, our clients, the better off we all are. And so I hope that you will continue to think of us as a resource to help you as you're moving forward as to how do we present this, how do we sell it, how do we share the information, because we want to make sure that we're telling everybody the right thing, not just making stuff up, because we sort of know, but we don't really know. So the more we know, the better off we are as people who to deal with this every day. So again, I thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it greatly on behalf of our association, and anything we can do to help and help you discuss this in the public. And if you want to come back to a future meeting, we'd love to have you.
All right. I will take you up on that. Thank you, Rick. I really appreciate it. Bye,
All right,
everybody.
Thanks, Jenny. Thanks.
Have a great